I'm Ava, a 28-year-old pastry chef. I love my job. It allows me to be creative and make people happy with my cakes and pastries. I live in a small but cozy house that I bought with my husband, Daniel. We met 2 years ago, and it was love at first sight for both of us. Daniel works as a software engineer. He's quiet and serious, but he has a good heart. We got married a year after we met, and life has been mostly good, except for one problem: my mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor Hamilton. From the day I met her, Eleanor made it clear she didn't like me. She's a tall, stern woman who always says what she thinks. She raised Daniel by herself, and they are very close. She wanted Daniel to marry her friend's daughter, Emily, and she told me so the first time we met. Emily is around our age, pretty, and she works as a lawyer. Eleanor often talks about how smart and talented Emily is. One sunny Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen preparing a new cake recipe for my blog. Daniel was in the living room, working on his laptop. I heard the front door open and Eleanor's voice calling out. "Ava, dear, are you home?" she said, her tone polite but cold. "Yes, Mrs. Hamilton, I'm in the kitchen," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. She walked in, looking around with a disapproving frown. "I see you're baking again. Don't you think you should find a real job?" I sighed quietly. "I love baking, Mrs. Hamilton. It makes me happy." She sniffed. "Well, Emily just got promoted at her law firm. She's doing so well." I forced a smile. "That's great for her." Eleanor walked over to the counter and picked up a cookie. "I still think Daniel would have been better off with her." I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. Just then, Daniel walked in. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, surprised but happy to see her. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by," she said, her tone softening as she turned to him. They chatted for a bit, and then Eleanor said she had to leave. After she left, I turned to Daniel. "Doesn't it bother you, the way she talks about me?" Daniel looked uncomfortable. "She's just set in her ways, Ava. She doesn't mean any harm." "But she said again that she wishes you'd married Emily," I said, feeling frustrated. Daniel sighed. "I love you, Ava. That's what matters. Just ignore her comments." I nodded, but it wasn't easy. I knew Eleanor would never stop trying to make me feel like I wasn't good enough for her son. But I loved Daniel, and I was determined to make our marriage work, no matter what his mother said or did. Life went on after Eleanor's visit, but her words lingered in my mind. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Daniel and me grew. I felt like I was walking on eggshells whenever the topic of his mother came up. Daniel was my husband, and I loved him, but it hurt that he couldn't see how his mother's behavior was affecting our marriage. One evening, while we were having dinner, I decided to bring it up again. I knew it was a risk, but I couldn't keep my feelings bottled up any longer. "Daniel, we need to talk about your mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. "What about her?" "It's just, every time she visits, she makes these comments, and it feels like she's trying to drive a wedge between us," I explained. Daniel sighed, putting his fork down. "Ava, she's my mom. She's not trying to hurt anyone. She's just protective." "But don't you see? She's constantly comparing me to Emily. She even told me she wishes you had married her instead," I said, my frustration growing. Daniel frowned. "She said that?" "Yes, she did. And it's not the first time," I replied, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Look, I know my mom can be difficult, but she raised me on her own. I can't just turn my back on her." "I'm not asking you to turn your back on her. I just want you to understand how her words and actions are affecting me, affecting us," I said, my voice tinged with desperation. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Ava. I'll talk to her, okay? I'll make sure she understands that she needs to respect our marriage." I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. But deep down, I wasn't sure if anything would change. Eleanor was set in her ways, and I had a feeling it would take more than a conversation to change her behavior. A few weeks later, Daniel's birthday was approaching. I wanted to do something special for him, so I planned a small party with our friends and family. I knew inviting Eleanor was risky, but she was Daniel's mother, and I didn't want to exclude her. The day of the party arrived, and I was busy in the kitchen preparing Daniel's favorite dishes. The house was filled with the smell of baking and the sound of laughter as our guests arrived. Eleanor arrived just as I was taking the cake out of the oven. She walked into the kitchen and looked around, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ava, what's all this?" she asked, her tone disapproving. "It's Daniel's birthday. I wanted to do something special for him," I replied, trying to keep my voice friendly. She sniffed. "Seems like a lot of unnecessary fuss. Emily always says that simple celebrations are more meaningful." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Well, Daniel likes it when I cook for him, and it's his day, so I want to make it special." Eleanor didn't say anything more, but I could tell she wasn't pleased. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and focus on the party. As the evening went on, everything seemed to be going well. Daniel was having a good time, and our guests seemed to be enjoying themselves. I was starting to relax when I heard a commotion coming from the living room. I rushed in to find Eleanor standing in the middle of the room, her face red with anger. Daniel was trying to calm her down, but she was having none of it. "This is all wrong. This isn't how you celebrate a birthday," Eleanor exclaimed, her voice rising. "Mom, please. It's my birthday and I'm enjoying myself. Can't you just be happy for me?" Daniel said, his tone pleading. Eleanor turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You wanted to make me look bad. You wanted to show that you know better than me." I was taken aback by her accusation. "Mrs. Hamilton, that's not true. I just wanted to make Daniel's birthday special." But Eleanor wasn't listening. She stormed out of the house, leaving everyone in shock. I looked at Daniel, my heart sinking. This was supposed to be a happy occasion, but it had turned into a disaster, and I had a feeling that things were only going to get worse from here. The weeks following Daniel's birthday were tense. Daniel tried to talk to his mom, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced I had purposely tried to make her look bad. I felt like I was stuck in a bad dream, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wake up. Daniel and I argued more. He kept saying I should try to understand his mom's point of view, but I felt like he wasn't trying to understand mine. I was hurt and frustrated, and I didn't know how to make things better. Then, one day, Daniel came home with an idea. "Let's throw a family dinner," he said, sounding hopeful. "Maybe if Mom sees that we're trying to include her, she'll start to come around." I was skeptical, but I agreed. I loved Daniel, and I wanted our marriage to work. So we planned a dinner and invited Eleanor. The day of the dinner arrived, and I was a nervous wreck. I cooked all day, making sure everything was perfect. Daniel helped me set the table and decorate the dining room. We were both trying to make this work. Eleanor arrived, and I greeted her at the door. "Welcome, Mrs. Hamilton. It's good to see you," I said, forcing a smile. She looked around, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Ava. I appreciate the invitation," she said, and there was a hint of warmth in her voice that I hadn't heard before. The dinner started off well. We all sat down, and I served the food. Eleanor even complimented my cooking, which surprised me. Then it was time for dessert. I had made my signature cake, one that I was particularly proud of. I knew Eleanor had a peanut allergy, so I had been extra careful to avoid any cross-contamination. As we all enjoyed the cake, I noticed Eleanor suddenly stop eating. Her face turned red, and she started coughing. "Mom, are you okay?" Daniel asked, jumping up from his chair. Eleanor gasped for air, her hand clutching her throat. "Peanuts!" she managed to choke out. Daniel immediately got her allergy medicine and helped her take it. Slowly, she started to breathe easier, but she was still red and looked scared. Once she caught her breath, she turned to me, her eyes filled with accusation. "You did this on purpose," she said, her voice shaky. I was shocked. "No, Mrs. Hamilton, I would never do that. I was so careful." But Daniel interrupted, his voice filled with anger. "Ava, how could you? You know about Mom's allergy." "I didn't do it, Daniel, I swear," I said, near tears. Eleanor looked at me, her expression triumphant. "You tried to get rid of me. You want me out of your life." "No, that's not true," I protested, but it was like they couldn't hear me. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Eleanor left, and Daniel was furious with me. He said he needed some time to think and left the house. I sat at the table, alone, staring at the uneaten cake. I didn't understand what had happened. I knew I hadn't put any peanuts in that cake. But if I didn't, then who did? And why? I felt like the world was crumbling around me. My marriage was falling apart, and I was being accused of something I didn't do. I didn't know how to prove my innocence, and I didn't know if Daniel would even believe me if I did. I felt helpless and scared, and I didn't know what to do. The dinner disaster lingered in the air like a bad aftertaste. Everyone had left, the house was eerily silent, but the tension was still palpable. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling triumph. "Well, Ava, I guess now everyone will see you for who you really are. A criminal," she sneered. I stared at her in disbelief. "Eleanor, this is insane. I didn't do anything to the cake." "Oh, but who will believe you now?" she said, her voice laced with venom. "However, there's a way out for you. Divorce Daniel and sign the house over to him. Do that, and I won't go to the police." My heart pounded in my chest. This was blackmail. "You can't be serious," I managed to say. "Oh, I am very serious," she said, a wicked smile spreading across her face. Before I could respond, Daniel walked in. His face was hard, unreadable. "Is it true, Ava? What my mother is saying?" he asked, his voice cold. I looked at him, desperately hoping he would see reason. "Daniel, please, you have to believe me. I didn't do anything. Your mother is trying to frame me." But his expression didn't change. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but right now I'm siding with my mother. I want a divorce, Ava, and the house should be mine." I felt like the ground had been pulled from under my feet. This was not the man I married. This was not the Daniel I loved. "No, Daniel, you can't do this. We built this life together. Please, see reason," I pleaded. But he didn't budge. "It's over, Ava. I've made up my mind." Eleanor watched the scene, a satisfied smirk on her face. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and called the police. If Eleanor wanted to play this game, then let's play it with all cards on the table. When the police arrived, Eleanor immediately started her performance, tears and all, claiming I tried to kill her with peanuts. I stood my ground. "That's not true. I didn't do anything to the cake. She's trying to frame me because she wants me out of her son's life." The officers looked between us, clearly trying to figure out who to believe. And then I took out my main trump card. I had installed them in the kitchen for my baking blog. "Wait," I said. "There might be footage. We can check the kitchen cameras." Everyone's eyes turned to me. Daniel looked confused, but Eleanor's face drained of color. We all went to the kitchen, and I pulled up the footage on my laptop. The video showed the kitchen, the cake on the counter. And then, there she was, Eleanor sneaking into the kitchen, looking around before pulling something out of her purse and sprinkling it over the cake. The room fell silent as the truth revealed itself on the screen. Eleanor tried to speak, to explain, but her words were empty. The evidence was right there. Daniel looked from the screen to his mother, his face a mix of shock and betrayal. The police took Eleanor away, and Daniel and I were left in the echoing silence of the house. He tried to apologize, to explain, but the damage was done. Trust, once broken, is not easily mended. The day of the court hearing arrived like a storm, full of tension and uncertainty. The courtroom was intimidating, with its high ceilings and the judge's stern gaze. My heart pounded as I took my seat, feeling like I was in some surreal movie. The proceedings began, and Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was the first to take the stand. Dressed in a somber outfit, she looked the part of a distressed victim. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. With trembling hands and a quavering voice, she portrayed herself as an innocent, wronged by my alleged malicious actions. I can't believe she would do something like this to me," Eleanor whimpered, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My fists clenched in my lap. It was infuriating to watch she poses as a victim. Then, without warning, Eleanor clutched her chest and collapsed, feigning a faint. The courtroom erupted into chaos. "Is there a doctor here?" someone shouted. I sat there, frozen, as people rushed to her aid. This was another one of her theatrics, but it was working. The judge called for a recess, and Eleanor was taken out of the courtroom, still playing the role of the frail, aggrieved mother. When the trial resumed, it was Daniel's turn to testify. My heart ached as I looked at him, the man I once loved, now a stranger willing to believe the worst in me. "Your Honor, I can't express how shocked I was," Daniel said, his voice steady but cold. "I trusted Ava, and to think she could have done something so heinous." His words cut through me like a knife. He was completely under his mother's spell, blinded by her manipulations. My lawyer presented my defense, highlighting Eleanor's history of hostility towards me and bringing forth the evidence of the kitchen video. The footage was clear, showing Eleanor surreptitiously adding peanuts to the cake. As the video played, there were murmurs in the courtroom. Eleanor's facade began to crumble, but she still clung to her act. "This is a setup! She's trying to frame me!" Eleanor cried out, but her words sounded hollow now. The judge watched the video intently, his expression unreadable. When it finished, he called for a recess to deliberate. Sitting there, waiting for the verdict, felt like an eternity. My entire life hung in the balance, based on the decision of a man who had never met me before today. Finally, the judge returned. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak. After reviewing the evidence presented, it is clear that the allegations against Mrs. Ava Hamilton are unfounded. The video footage shows Mrs. Eleanor Hamilton adding the allergen to the cake herself. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Relief washed over me, followed by a surge of vindication. Eleanor let out a wail, still clinging to her victimhood, but her cries fell on deaf ears now. The judge continued, "Therefore, I find Mrs. Ava Hamilton not guilty of the charges against her." Tears filled my eyes, not of sadness, but of relief and triumph. The truth had prevailed, despite Eleanor's theatrics and Daniel's accusations. As I left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I had faced my fears and stood up for myself. After the trial, life seemed to move in a blur. Winning the case brought relief, but it also left a gaping hole where my former life used to be. The house felt even emptier now. I missed Daniel, despite everything, but life had to go on. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in baking and my blog. My followers were a source of strength, sending messages of support and love. It felt good to be understood and appreciated. One day, while I was recording a new recipe, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend Mia. "Coffee? I have news." I smiled, grateful for the distraction. Mia had been a rock through all of this. We met at our usual cafe, a cozy little place with the best lattes in town. "Ava, you look better!" Mia greeted me with a warm hug. "Thanks, Mia. So, what's the news?" She grinned, her eyes sparkling. "I'm getting married!" I gasped, joy filling my heart. "Mia, that's amazing! Tell me everything!" As she gushed about her fiancé and their plans, I felt genuinely happy for her. It was refreshing to talk about something other than my own troubles. Then, Mia's expression turned serious. "Ava, how are you really doing?" I sighed, stirring my coffee. "I'm getting by. The house feels empty, but I'm managing." Mia reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're strong, Ava, and you did the right thing, standing up for yourself." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "Yeah, I did. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." We chatted for a while longer before parting ways. As I walked back home, I felt a sense of determination. I had survived the storm. Now it was time to rebuild. Over the next few weeks, I poured my energy into my blog, creating new recipes and sharing them with my followers. The positive feedback was uplifting. It felt good to be doing something I loved, something that brought joy to others. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Eleanor's lawyer. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside was a formal apology from Eleanor. She expressed her remorse for her actions and the pain she had caused. I read the letter, but behind every word were hidden her taunts, insults, and threats. I realized I couldn't forgive her. Not now. The next day, I received another piece of news. The divorce papers had been finalized. My marriage to Daniel was officially over. It was a bittersweet moment. A chapter of my life had closed, but a new one was waiting to be written. I called Mia to share the news. It's official. The divorce is finalized. Mia's voice was gentle. How do you feel? I don't know, I admitted. Relieved, I guess. Sad too. It's complicated. Take your time, Ava. Healing isn't a race. Her words comforted me. I knew I had a long road ahead, but I also knew I wasn't alone. That night, I baked a cake. Not for a video or a client, but for myself. As I mixed the batter and preheated the oven, I felt a sense of peace. Baking had always been my sanctuary, and it felt good to be in my element. As the cake baked, the sweet aroma filled the house, bringing back memories. Some were painful, but others were filled with love and laughter. I realized then that those memories were a part of me, a part of my journey. When the cake was done, I sat at the kitchen table with a slice and a cup of tea. The first bite was delicious, a reminder of the simple joys in life. I smiled to myself, feeling a glimmer of hope. Sweet justice had been served, but it was the small, sweet moments like this that truly mattered. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew I was ready to face them. This was my new beginning, and I was determined to make the most of it.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry, I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread. hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.